Welcome to the Heartbreak Chronicles, where every story is a raw reflection of life. Hit that subscribe button to stay tuned, give us a like to show your support, and share this episode with your friends. Don't forget to leave a comment and let us know what you think. Now, let's dive into today's story. The night was like water, and I sat in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel, the neon light outside the window flickering in the darkness, reflecting on my heavy face. For some time now, my heart has been filled with an indescribable uneasiness. My wife, Karen, a woman I've spent 10 years with, has become stranger and stranger lately. Karen often comes home late at night, always casually explaining that it's because of work stress. She's a game anchor, and the job of live streaming really isn't easy, but I always get the feeling that she's intentionally avoiding my questions. That night, as she pushed open the door to her house, exhausted, I could smell her perfume and a faint hint of cigarette smoke. She doesn't smoke. I couldn't help but ask her, "Why are you back so late? Where have you been?" She frowned a little impatiently and replied, "Just went outside to relax. Work is so stressful, I need time to regulate." There was a hint of perfunctory in her voice, and I knew she didn't want to talk about it. A strong sense of unease rose in me as I watched the exhaustion and avoidance in her eyes. This went on for weeks. She was coming home later and later, and my trust in her was crumbling. Though I had tried to comfort myself by telling myself that it was just stress at work, the doubt inside me was like a silent viper, slowly wrapping itself around my thoughts, and I couldn't get rid of it. That's when things took a turn for the worse. My good friend Ron called to ask me to meet him. There was an unusual sense of urgency in his tone, and my heart tightened as I hastened to agree. Under the dim lights of the bar, Ron sat in the corner with a stony face, and when he saw me walk in, he immediately beckoned me over. I had just sat down when he lowered his voice and said, "Jason, I saw Karen today with a man." His tone was calm, but the words were like a dagger that stabbed right into my heart. I froze for a moment and asked suspiciously, "Are you sure it's Karen?" Inside, however, he already felt an icy chill spreading. Ron glanced at me and nodded, pulling his cell phone out of his pocket and handing it to me, a picture on the screen. The photo shows Karen holding hands with a strange man with a smile on her face that I hadn't seen before. That smile, full of sweetness and intimacy, and that person, never me. My mind went blank for a moment. The photo seemed to loom before my eyes, and all my suspicions and insecurities were confirmed in this moment. Ron sighed softly and patted me on the shoulder. "Dude, I know this is hard for you to accept, but you have to face this reality. If you want to know more, I can get you a private investigator." I nodded, my insides filled with anger and helplessness. I needed to know the truth, even though I knew it would probably hurt me more. The next day I met with Jerry, the private investigator Ron had introduced me to. Jerry, an experienced-looking middle-aged man, listened to my description and handed me a small recording device and showed me how to use it. He said, "Put this in her car and it will record all her conversations so you can see exactly what she's doing." Back home, Karen is preparing for her upcoming work trip to Las Vegas. She told me she was going to a game show and would probably be there for a couple days. I nodded, showing nothing unusual on the surface, but in my heart I had already decided to find out what was going on. Her suitcases were laid out on the bed in her bedroom, and I pretended I had no intention of helping her unpack. As I flipped through one of the layers, I suddenly found something that dazzled me: birth control pills. At that moment, I felt as if my heart was being clutched hard by an invisible hand. Karen had told me she wasn't going to have children and convinced me to get sterilized. We had discussed this for a long time, and eventually I agreed with her decision because we both felt that our lives were complete and we didn't need another child. However, the box of birth control pills now in front of me completely shattered my last shred of trust. I stood there, my mind reeling. She's carrying birth control pills. What does that even mean? Why does she even need this? My thoughts felt like a jumble of possible explanations swirling around in my head. Does she have another man out there? If so, who is she defending herself against by using this contraceptive? A strong wave of jealousy and anger came over me, weighing me down to the point where I could barely breathe. I silently put the birth control pills back in their place and pretended I didn't see anything. I knew that the box of pills alone didn't tell me everything, but it was enough to make me question everything. I carefully placed the recording device in her car, making sure it was activated, and walked back to the bedroom, watching her continue her busy schedule. A few days later, Karen set off as planned. Before she left, she still smiled at me as if nothing had happened. "I'll call you every day when I get there, don't worry," she said, kissing my cheek gently. I held back my inner misgivings, pretended nothing had happened, and sent her away. Every day since she left, I felt the unease grow in my heart. I have been waiting and waiting for the recording device to give me a definitive answer. However, the first few days of the recording were characterized by only a few insignificant noises coming from the device. It wasn't until the third night that I finally heard her conversation with another man. The man's voice was low and ambiguous as she called him darling affectionately on the phone. On the phone, they discussed the upcoming sweet weekend, and Karen excitedly planned their trip to Las Vegas. Her voice was full of anticipation, with no hint of guilt about me as a husband. Listening to the recording, it was as if my heart was being ripped out of my chest. All the suspicions became reality in this moment. Karen really betrayed me. All those work pressures and overtime she mentioned on the phone turned out to be for meeting another man. My heart sank to the bottom, a mixture of anger and disappointment. I never thought that our marriage would fall apart the way it did. Thinking back to her soft, "Don't worry," before she left was so ironic now. But I knew that this recording alone was not enough for me to fully understand the truth. I decided to investigate further. I want to know how much she's hiding, how long she's been betraying. My heart has made up its mind that no matter how painful it is, I will completely remove this veil of hypocrisy. The lights of Las Vegas were still shining brightly, and my insides had long been filled with anger and doubt. On the other end of the phone, Karen gently told me that her job required her to remain in Las Vegas for a few more days to negotiate a partnership with the game company's agent. I held the phone, my mind already skeptical of her every word. "Yeah? Take care of yourself then. Don't get exhausted." I tried to sound as calm and natural as possible. Her voice was still soft. "Don't worry, honey. Everything will be fine. We'll celebrate together when I get back." Then the sound of hanging up came from the other end of the line. I put the phone down, but I couldn't find peace inside. A few days ago, I heard the truth on a recording device that she wasn't busy with work, but with another man, Greg, planning a sweet weekend in Las Vegas. Now, she's still lying. My anger was mixed with doubt, and I knew I couldn't wait passively like this any longer. I need more evidence to expose her lies once and for all. When I got home, I decided to start with her studio. There may be more clues to her betrayal hidden there. Entering her studio, I carefully checked every drawer, file cabinet, and even her computer. There were some ordinary-looking papers and bills scattered on the table, and I glanced through some of them. There was nothing out of the ordinary on the surface. Her computer had a password on it, and I tried entering a few important dates as passwords and finally managed to unlock it. The screen jumped to her email screen and I began to scrutinize her email. At first, the emails were mostly her work correspondence and seemed perfectly normal. But as I dug deeper, I found signs of something out of the ordinary. A couple of emails from Greg that weren't in plain sight, but had been carefully placed in an inconspicuous folder by her. Greg mentioned a secret apartment in the email, saying it would be their private space. My mind tightened. A condo? I'd never heard of Karen buying a condo. Continuing to go through the emails, I found the exact address of the condo, and the emails included several electronic attachments of the purchase contract and bills. What surprised me even more was that Greg also mentioned that Karen had all the details ready and that they could meet there anytime. It was all so unbelievable to me. Not only had she betrayed me, but she had secretly set up an exclusive place for their private meetings. Although I have the address of the apartment, I do not have the keys to this apartment. I'm beginning to wonder if she's hiding the keys to her apartment somewhere, too. I remembered that she had mentioned earlier that she always had a spare key in case she lost it or needed a spare. Could her spare key be for this apartment? But I'd have to find the key to confirm. I thought of where she often kept her spare key, a small drawer in her bedroom. This drawer often holds her small important items and spare keys. My heart beating faster, I walked towards the bedroom and opened that drawer. In the corner of the drawer, I found a set of keys that I don't use very often, one of which looked very new. I don't recall her ever mentioning where the key was used, which caught my attention. I picked up this key and pondered if it was the key to the apartment. There's no direct proof that this is the key to the apartment, but judging by Karen's recent antics, I think it's likely that it's a spare key she has for that apartment for security purposes. My suspicions grew stronger, but I knew that I had to verify this in person at the apartment. The next day, I drove to the address of the apartment she mentioned in her email. It was an upscale neighborhood, quiet and secluded from the hustle and bustle. I stood in the doorway of my apartment, my palms sweaty and my mind nervous. I pulled the spare set of keys from my pocket and, with some trepidation, inserted that new key into the lock hole. The lock flicked and the door opened. At this moment, a cold feeling filled my heart. The key actually matched the lock, proving my worst suspicions. Karen did create a private space for her and Greg here, an other home that I've never been in. Walking into the apartment, I felt strange and alienated. The decor was very different from the style she displayed at home, appearing more modern and stylish. Every piece of furniture in the living room was well organized, revealing the importance she placed on the place. There were no traces of our life together, no photographs, no familiar objects, just the secrets she shared with that man. I walked towards the bedroom and opened the closet, where the clothes of both men and women were neatly hung. Greg's clothes stood side by side with Karen's, like a symbol of their life together. The anger in my heart grew stronger, but I remained calm, took out my cell phone, and filmed it all as evidence. As I walked into the living room, I noticed a card on a coffee table. It reads, "Looking forward to our next get-together. Love, Greg." The card was almost too much for me to bear any longer, and I clenched my fists with a mixture of anger and disappointment. I continued to search the rest of the apartment and finally found some bills and utility bills in a small drawer. All of these documents clearly show that Karen not only lived there, but also paid all of the apartment's expenses on a regular basis. The apartment had obviously been purchased specifically for her relationship with Greg, and all the details had been carefully arranged by her. After gathering enough evidence, I left the apartment and closed the door. In this moment, I felt like I was waking up from a nightmare, but this nightmare wasn't over yet. I knew that upon returning to reality, I would have to face her, and I would have to decide how to make her pay for it all. The car sped home, my hands gripping the steering wheel as anger rolled through my chest as if it were going to rip my heart out. Karen's secret apartment and the irrefutable evidence kept replaying in her mind like a nightmare. I never imagined that our 10-year marriage would go to pieces the way it did, and she, the woman I had loved so much, had gone behind my back and indulged herself without guilt in the arms of another man. I needed revenge. I needed to make her pay for her betrayal. The car pulls up in front of Greg's house, and there's an oppressive feeling in the air. The door opened and Christy appeared in the doorway, her expression pale but her eyes burning with hidden anger. Her hands shook a little, but her voice was firm. "What are you going to tell me?" Greg and Karen, they were having an affair. I didn't lay any groundwork. I just threw the hard truth at her. She froze for an instant, standing still as if struck by lightning, her face going from pale to unbearably pale. She tried to keep her composure, but the tears quickly came to her eyes. I handed her the picture that showed Greg and Karen close as if they were in a love play that couldn't be broken. Her fingers trembled as she squeezed the picture tighter, tears slipping silently down her face. But I could see that underneath that veneer of gentleness was burning with the same anger that I felt. "How dare they?" Her voice was low and shaky. "How dare he do this to me?" I looked at her and felt a mixed emotion in my heart. We are victims of the same, having been lied to and betrayed. But at this moment, the anger deep within us is binding us together. "I have a plan," I said in a deep voice. "We can't just let them get away with this. They have to pay for it." She looked up, a complex emotion in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" "We drop their stuff, everything they have at the door of their secret apartment," I said slowly, my tone icy, "and then tell them in the biggest possible words that we've seen it all. Make them realize that they can never come back to us." Christie's expression gradually regained a hint of sanity from her anger as she nodded slowly and wiped away her tears. Okay, we'll do it together. When I got home, I started organizing Karen's things. Looking at her closet, the space that once belonged to our life together is now a symbol of her betrayal of her marriage. I pulled her clothes out of the closet one by one and threw them into a garbage bag as hard as I could. Every time I saw a piece of her clothing, the anger in my heart deepened. All those expensive dresses, sexy lingerie, and bikinis she's got on for another man. Every piece of clothing seemed to mock my stupidity and blindness. I squeeze a bikini she's never worn before, my fingers unconsciously tightening as I toss it harshly into a trash bag. This woman who betrayed me for 10 years, is using these clothes to please another man. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got, and I almost wanted to burn all those clothes in one hand. But I knew that it wasn't enough. She needs to face up to what she's done. She needs to see her own things thrown mercilessly to the ground, just as mercilessly as she did to me. Meanwhile, Christy has not been idle. She pulled Greg's suits and ties, and those shirts she'd handpicked for him out of his closet and tossed them into a garbage bag, one by one. I could feel the hatred in her eyes deepen with each fling. She threw her clothes with a crisp, clean motion, as if the anger in her heart was slightly released with each piece of clothing she threw. All these clothes of his, I picked them out for him. Christy's voice was filled with indignation. Now, I can't wait to tear them all apart. I nodded, knowing full well how she felt. I could feel the anger inside her, just like I did. We all burn in the shadow of betrayal, waiting for action to vent this unspeakable pain. A few hours later, we drove to Karen's secret apartment with several bags full of clothes and belongings. The lights at the entrance to the apartment seemed harsh and cold, as if silently mocking our situation. Christy and I walked silently to the door of our apartment and dropped all of the clothing and belongings of both of us, without mercy, on the floor. The bags were flung at the door, even as we dumped them out defiantly, clothes strewn on the floor, as undignified and exposed as their once secret lives had been. When I was done with that, I took a marker out of my bag, crouched down on the floor, and wrote in big, hard letters on a huge sheet of white paper, "Goodbye, you sons of bitches." My fingers tightened around the pen, and as I wrote those words, it was as if I was venting all my anger and disappointment on this piece of paper. Every word penetrates the pain in my heart. I stood up and felt a cold satisfaction in my heart as I watched the paper stick to the door. Christy stood beside me, silently watching it all. She didn't say another word, but I knew that the hate in her heart was no different than mine. As I left the apartment, the night breeze blew across my face with a cool breeze, but my insides burned like fire. We left it all there for them to deal with. Karen and Greg will find out about this soon enough, and they will see the note we left and realize that they can never go back to the life they once had. But as we left, I began to feel an unspeakable emptiness inside. The thrill of retaliation brought instant gratification, but it could not heal the wounds deep in my heart. I know that the real pain is just beginning. The plan for revenge is already underway, but it's only the beginning. A few days later, Karen called with a tone that couldn't hide her excitement. "Jace, I have to tell you the good news. I won the Best Game Designer award at the Las Vegas Game Show. The agent is very satisfied with my work, and I'll have to stay for a few more days to discuss in depth with them about the subsequent cooperation." On the other end of the phone, her voice was still soft and confident, as if there was no rift between us. But it was clear to me that everything she said was a lie. The award was a shortcut to her relationship with Greg, and her whereabouts in Hawaii were a complete revelation of her betrayal. "Congratulations, that's great news." I responded with feigned calmness as I suppressed the anger inside me. She's still lying, unaware that her world is about to come crashing down. After hanging up, I sat down with Christy and plotted how to completely destroy Karen and Greg through the media. Revenge isn't just about hitting back emotionally, it's about knocking them into the deep end career-wise and reputation-wise. I know that Karen is ambitious about her career, and her image to the outside world is even more crucial. If these were destroyed, she would have nowhere to go with her life. As a veteran game designer, I have strong ties to both media and companies in the industry. I began to use these resources to spread scandal about Karen and Greg. We decided to start with an article. The article was posted anonymously on a well-known forum within the game industry with the striking title, "The Shady World of Game Design: A Perverse Path to Awards?" The article opens with a statement about Karen's lack of context for winning the Best Game Designer award, suggesting that her success was not entirely based on merit, but rather on her affair with Greg. In the article, we imply that she won the award through an inappropriate relationship and even used that relationship to gain benefits in the industry that shouldn't have been hers. Karen has an immoral relationship with Greg, who is married, and who is part of the jury. Not only did the two violate the rules of their profession, they trampled on their marriage vows. Greg's wife and Karen's husband are both victims of their betrayal, and it's no longer an industry secret that their private lives are messy. The article's language is sharp and blunt, unflinchingly exposing their relationship to the sunlight. The article was published and quickly created a huge buzz in the industry. On social media, many players and industry insiders began to question Karen's professionalism and wondered if her awards were truly earned. Many companies began to worry about the negative effects of working with her and suspended their cooperation with her, and a few even made direct public statements to disassociate themselves from her. And at this point, our operation is not over. I spread the word further through the gaming media to expose more of Karen's scandal with Greg. Several mainstream media outlets began to report on the story with headlines that were nothing short of eye-catching. Betrayal in the gaming world: how Karen was honored through shady means, and exposing Karen and Greg's double betrayal, the scandal behind the awards. Marriage breakup and gaming honors: was Karen's success built on lies? The media painted a detailed picture of how Karen used her relationship with Greg to climb up the industry ladder. And in the midst of this unethical relationship, she not only betrayed her marriage, but used it as an opportunity to gain accolades that she didn't deserve. Readers have left comments condemning their behavior, especially emphasizing that both men are family men whose infidelity has been severely flogged by public opinion. Did you guys know? She won the award by cheating on her husband. It's immoral. Their marriage is a joke to them. How dare the gaming industry allow this to happen? Do we even want to believe in these so-called awards? The comments came in like a tidal wave, pushing Karen and Greg into the limelight. Karen's reputation was completely destroyed almost overnight. She had hoped to capitalize on this success to further solidify her position in the industry, but didn't realize that this victory would become the beginning of her destruction. A few days later, Karen finally returned home. I almost didn't recognize her. She had lost the old sparkle in her eyes, and her face was covered in exhaustion and anxiety. The moment she pushed the door open, I saw helplessness and panic written in her eyes. "Jason." Her voice trembled. "I don't know what happened. Someone started a rumor online that Greg and I were—" Her words came to a screeching halt as tears began to well up in her eyes. I looked at her coldly, without an ounce of pity inside. This woman, she betrayed our marriage. She betrayed the 10 years we spent together. And now she's finally paying the price for her behavior. Jason, I really don't know why it's come to this. Those are all rumors. She looked at me almost pleadingly, trying to get my help. I slowly walked up to her, towered over her haggard form, and said in a cold voice, "Karen, you know what? This is what happens when you betray." She was stunned, shock in her eyes. Obviously, she hadn't expected me to say that. "You always thought you could hide everything and fool around with other men behind my back." My voice was icy cold with endless anger. "You thought I would believe your poorly thought-out lies forever? You're wrong. I've known everything about you and Greg for a long time." Her face instantly paled like paper, and her tears finally couldn't help but slide down. She shook her head, her voice hoarse. "No, Jason, it's not what you think. That's enough, Karen." I interrupted. "You betrayed our marriage. You betrayed our lives. And now, your career and reputation are equally destroyed by yourself. That's the price of betrayal." As if her body had been struck, she staggered back a few steps and finally sat down helplessly on the couch, covering her face and crying out in pain. I don't have an ounce of pity when I look at her like this. She chose betrayal. She chose to destroy everything we had. and now she's finally tasting the bitter fruit of that betrayal. I looked at her coldly, with nothing but endless determination in my heart. Karen's world had fallen apart, but I knew that the final death blow was yet to come. Not only had she betrayed our marriage, she was pregnant with someone else's child, a fact that stung me completely. She hid the abortion from me and never even mentioned a thing about it to me. I had been sterilized, and this child was obviously not mine. All of this is a consequence of her choices, and she will pay an unbearable price for it. The abortion slip, it was always in my hand. It was my last weapon, and a fact she couldn't escape. I decided that I couldn't let her get away with this betrayal easily. I made a copy of the abortion slip and attached a note. Karen aborted someone else's baby. I then mailed each of these letters to all of her family, friends, co-workers, and friends we once shared. I know that when they read this letter, Karen's last shred of decency will be destroyed. Not only is she a woman who betrayed her marriage, but she is also a woman who hid the truth and aborted the child of her affair. A few days later, the storm arrived as expected. Karen's mother sobbed on the phone. How could you? How could you do something like this without us knowing? Her once closest friends began to question her and even publicly disowned her on social media. She became the talk of the social circle and the object of contempt. She is no longer the glowing, successful designer, but a woman shrouded in betrayal and lies. Her friends and family could no longer accept her presence and sympathize with her situation. The man who was once a hotshot in the gaming industry is now a laughingstock that everyone avoids. Karen's isolation came quickly and completely. She no longer has anything to fall back on, and those who were once willing to help her are now victims of her betrayal. They no longer wanted to be around her, and even her family was disappointed in her to the core. She was completely devastated. At the same time, I took another action: divorce. I no longer need any explanations from her and no longer want to maintain this sham of a marriage. I sought out an experienced divorce attorney and decided that I wanted to get the majority of the property. She betrayed me, and I will never let her get off easy. Divorce proceedings soon commenced. The courts were on my side as a series of facts about Karen's betrayal and abortion came to light in full force. I received the main property and most of the joint property in our name. And Karen, not only has she lost her cherished career and reputation, but now even her financial foundation is crumbling. She was forced to move out of the home we once shared and into a small, modest apartment alone. Greg was not immune. His wife Christy firmly divorced him, taking most of the property. Greg had thought he could get away with it easily, but he underestimated Christy's determination and anger. Not only did Christy get the property, but she also split their savings and investments. Karen's life is completely falling apart. She lost her career, her possessions, her friends, and even her family could no longer trust her. She tried to find work again, but her reputation had long been infamous in the gaming industry, and no company wanted to risk working with her. All those voices that once praised her talent have now turned into sarcasm and ridicule. She tries to look for opportunities in other cities, but no matter where she goes, the shadow of her past always follows her. Whenever she tries to start a new life, someone always recognizes her name and associates it with the sensational scandal. Her loneliness and despair grew with each passing day. Eventually, she chose to leave the city and travel far away to try to get away from it all. But she knew in her heart that the price of betrayal would be with her wherever she went. No one wants to believe her or give her another chance again. A few months later, my attorney informed me that the divorce was official. I gained everything we ever had, and Karen was left with nothing in the ruins of this marriage. That night, I stood in front of our house with a cold wind blowing against my face. The house is empty, and the memories that used to belong to us are now long since dust. I walked into the house alone, lit the lights, and felt an unspeakable heaviness. I am well aware of the cost of cheating and betrayal, which is often difficult to bear. Karen and Greg paid a terrible price for their choices, and I suffered my own pain for the breakup of the marriage. The consequences of betrayal are not just the breakdown of a relationship, but the collapse of an entire life. Karen and Greg's cheating has cost them their careers, their families, their friends, and even their futures have become bleak. The price of betrayal is heavy, and they can't afford that heavy price after all. In this storm of betrayal, all pay the price for their choices. And the nature of betrayal is, after all, an inescapable destiny. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.